All right, guys, we are back and so excited because the Chargers have hired their new head coach. And right now we're going to be joined by someone who has been really on the Brandon Staley train for really 2 or 3 months now. And that's Ryan Dyrud, who is the CEO of the LAFB Network. Selfishly, if you do not follow them, please make sure you do because I do write for them as well. Ryan, thanks for joining us, man. How are you doing?
Fellas, fantastic. What a crazy last 30 minutes finishing up that Buccaneers Saints game. Then all of a sudden this news breaks. So,
Yeah.
but I'm doing great. Happy to be on your show. Steven, obviously talked to you a bunch since you do write for the LA Football Network also, but Tyler and Alex, great to meet you officially. I know we've chatted on Twitter, but it's nice to put names to faces and talk some Chargers football. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, this was honestly kind of a sign because we were going to talk to you about this, really expecting the Chargers to draw this process out, potentially going after Brian Dable, but we wanted to get some more information out on Brandon Staley. And so we figured, you know what, why don't we plan a night with Ryan, who's been on this train from day one. So, obviously you are a Broncos fan, you cover the Rams, you cover the Chargers. So, Brandon Staley, the Rams, the Chargers rather well. Why did you feel like 2 or 3 months ago that Brandon Staley was ready to be a head coach?
Well, I think, and that's a great question, that one that everyone asks just because it's, so quick, first year as a coordinator. But when we were covering the Rams and just covering him let me go back. When McVay first hired Staley, that alone was like a shocker. No one knew who the guy was. He was an outside linebacker coach on, Vic Fangio's staff for the Broncos. He brought over from the Bears, but usually you don't see a guy that's been a linebacker coach for 3 years make a jump all of a sudden to D coordinator. So already had to do some research on him. Comes from John Carroll. Played some QB and stuff in his days and stuff like that. But we could tell early in the summer once he was on staff, just in Zoom calls and then watching his interviews and stuff like that, just you can tell when coaches are different, right? Like there's something that the way they talk to people, the way their brain works, the way that they communicate things. It's like, okay, this guy is something different. And then when we saw it on the field and in term guys like Darius Williams, Leonard Floyd, who, was considered a bust almost out of Chicago, many others on this Rams defense turned into almost stars because of the scheme he implemented. You start thinking, okay, there's something special about him that's different than just a D coordinator. People buy into his plan. People buy into what he preaches, and he does certain things. His coaching staff bond it. We had Coach Henderson, the defensive line coach, on our show, and he was like, this guy's a genius. He knows what he's doing. Like, he's changed the way we as coaches coach. So I think that's where I was just like, man, this guy's going to be a head coach sooner rather than later. I didn't know necessarily if it would for sure be after 1 year, but once the Rams defense just kept accelerating, I was like, yeah, he's going to be a hot name at the very end of the season. And sure enough, he was. And, it was a bummer the way the Rams season ended yesterday. I know a lot of people think that took smoke out of his, hype, but Steven, Tyler, Alex, guys, I'm sure you guys know you can't judge someone on one game. You have to judge the body of work. And I think his season spoke for himself.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about the fact that you can't judge people off of one game on Twitter for about 3 weeks now when it comes to Arthur Smith and Brian Dable and Brandon Staley. But yeah, no, I mean, I was pretty shocked by the hire. I want to know what you thought because the Chargers obviously play 4-3 defense, and it's been kind of rumored now after this Staley hire they might switch to 3-4. So how do you think that kind of plays out for the Chargers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And one that I actually talked with my co-host Frosty about because he's played in both schemes. And I asked him, I was like, how important is it as a player when a coach comes in and if you switch from a 4-3-3-4? And, his answer and then mine after watching a lot of film too is nowadays that, base formation is used so rarely in full schemes. Like the Rams run a 3-4, but with Staley's system, they literally run nickel and dime 86% of the time. They're running base 3-4 less than 20% of the time. So, I mean, that can be construed however you want to construe it. I know Joey Bosa has said he wants to play in a 4-3, but I think Staley would do things to still keep him on, a 5-tech outside and wouldn't necessarily make him play in that inside where he would maybe play in a normal 3-4. So Staley's a smart guy. He's going to adapt his scheme to where his players fit. I don't want Chargers fans to get too wrapped up. They're going to change the 3-4 and it's going to mess up what we have going. I think they'll be just fine because he'll implement things that will fit where these players mold best. And he'll bring a staff in which is obviously why he was hired. I think in that interview, he talked about the staff he wants to bring in. And obviously Spanos and Telesco liked what he laid out, the plans, the blueprint. So he'll bring a staff in that will make these guys ready for whatever scheme. I wouldn't even be shocked if they just run some sort of 4-3-4 hybrid, not necessarily even a true 3-4 base.
Wonderful. Is there a guy in particular or a couple of guys in particular that you think either fit in better because of this or completely stick out like a sore thumb now because they just don't fit?
As in like players on the Chargers defense?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I cannot wait to see Derwin James in this defense.
Yeah.
Obviously, we see they play, he's safety. Jalen Ramsey is corner, but we saw Jalen Ramsey have one of his best years with him. And I think he'll do things with Derwin James. They will look, I mean, it's hard to make Derwin James better when he's actually on the field because of how good he is when he's healthy. But I just think he'll put him in a position. John Johnson had a career year for the Rams. He's going to be a free agent. So he'll get paid big, handsomely. And I just think, Derwin James is obviously a better talent than John Johnson. So, but I'm trying to think off the top of my head, lesser known guys. Cause I mean, the good ones are going to be fine still. Joey Bosa is still going to be great. I'm curious what they'll do at edge. Obviously you got some question marks there. If, Uchenna Nwosu, if they're going to bring back a guy like Melvin Ingram. I just talked before we jumped on that Leonard Floyd's going to be a free agent from the Rams. I would suspect he'll be a big target for the Chargers now because of those question marks at edge. And if he can bring him up and, Joey Bosa, Leonard Floyd pairing, that could be a lot of fun to watch. And then these linebackers, because he was a linebacker coach by trade. So you look at Drew Tranquil coming off injury. You look at Kenneth Murray, obviously, who was a tackling machine. I love what you guys do, covering the team as well. So you guys I know you've talked extensively about Kenneth Murray and, he's had some struggles, but obviously, finished with over 100 tackles. So, I think this linebacking group will be one to really start showing out because considering the Rams have the number one defense with linebackers that no one in the league had ever heard of, especially if you're not a Rams fan. I mean, Troy Reader, because Micah Kaiser got hurt. They lost their other number one linebacker in training camp. And then Troy Reader steps in for Micah Kaiser and he ends up having a fairly decent year. Credit some to Joe Barry too, as linebacker coach, but a lot of that is just scheme fit. So roundabout way, Tyler, to answer your question, there's gonna be a lot of players that are gonna benefit from what Staley can do here.
Love it. Woo.
Yeah. This is exciting times for the defense. And, all of us, every single Chargers fan that I've ever talked to has been begging for a more aggressive, more modern defense. And they're going to get that in spades this year. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Derwin James. A lot has been made about like what his role, well, not a lot because this just barely happened, but the star role for this 3-4 Eagle front, how would you describe what Derwin James is in for in the next couple of seasons?
Well, the Rams play a lot of too high safeties. So, but Derwin is such a special player that he can really play anywhere on the field. If you bring him down more in the box, we saw when they run nickel a lot. I was thinking, coming into the season, we would see Terrell Burgess, well out of Utah.
My guy, yes, sir.
Great player. Yeah. Who I think is still going to be very good. Unfortunately, he got banged up throughout the year, but I expected to see him a lot out on nickel, play in the box some, or him the too high guy and then bring down. At the time, Taylor Rapp was the starter. And then obviously we saw Jordan Fuller kind of rise to prominence with the Rams safeties, but Derwin James just gives you so much flexibility. You can really do anything with them. So I could see him playing, back there roaming as kind of the free guy, but also I would not be shocked at all if they put him close to the box and run support like he's done with a lot of his career. So he's a guy that they can just single out. And even, I wouldn't be shocked if they put him more on, top receivers, have him do more. I know he was prepping a lot in training camp this year to do more quote unquote corner work or cover receivers. That's always, practicing with some of the, Keenan Allen and guys like that. So I wouldn't be shocked if they see more of that. So he's a guy that, there's really no true answer because he can just do anything when he's healthy.
Yeah, no doubt.
So the offense is obviously kind of going to be a focus and, all throughout kind of the Staley rumors. Yeah, all throughout the Staley rumors, it was like, well, he better have a good, plan for the offense, and he got hired. So we assume he had a good plan for the offense. What do you think the Chargers do at offensive coordinator? Obviously, they have a lot of choices. They can keep Shane Steichen because he's under contract. They could potentially promote Pep Hamilton. They could go for some of the Rams guys. What do you think is kind of the option there that you like?
Yeah, it's that's probably I'm assuming that was probably the most important thing of his interview was what he was going to do at offense, especially with the rise of Justin Herbert and I talked a lot throughout this necessarily transition, but even before Anthony Lynn was fired, the most important thing that Tom Telesco, that Dean Spanos do is they cannot screw up Justin Herbert, whatever at all costs. That's even why I was probably one of the last ones that was still not necessarily supporting Inflin, but I was still like, you know what, I'm okay with him running out just because of how well Justin Herbert's done. Because the last thing they can do is screw up Justin Herbert. So that'll be the most important thing Staley does. And obviously he must have laid out a really strong plan to these guys that they felt comfortable with hiring a defensive guy. The obvious choice right now is, Shane Steichen or Pep Hamilton. A lot of people keep talking about that. I love Pep Hamilton. I met him when he was, in the XFL with the Guardians. Just a great, great guy, super charismatic, down to earth. Obviously, we saw his influence on Justin Herbert. You mentioned Shane Steichen, Alex, who is under contract. So I think those are fine choices. Kevin Conley, who's the Rams offensive coordinator, doesn't call plays. So we could see like a Matt LaFleur type move where Sean McVay brought Matt LaFleur to be his OC. And then 1 year later, he did a lateral move to Tennessee just so he could be the play caller. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he did that, came to the Chargers just so he could actually be like the footprint of the offense. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of guys he'll vet, but I think those three for now would be the most, just to keep consistency, whether it be with Steichen or Pep, and then, or to keep consistent with Staley with what he knows in Kevin O'Connell. So there'll be a lot of names. I saw Jason Lockeforna throw some names out. If I'm being honest, I don't trust Lockeforna a lot. I feel like he throws a lot of stuff out and it never comes to fruition. He's one of those sources that I'm like, yeah, I think he just throws stuff at the wall and hope it sticks. So I'm not even going to bring it up because I don't see those as possible candidates, if I'm being honest.
Who are those candidates?
Are there any you guys? You guys know stuff. Tell me, what do you guys think? Are there any candidates you like?
Oh, I don't know jack shit. Steven?
Well, I know one, Steven, just to jump into. I know the run game coordinator up in San Francisco because obviously Saleh took the passing game coordinator, LaFleur's brother. So Mike McDaniel is still available, which would be a good option. Not to steal. I'm sure you're going to go into that, Steven. But the only thing I would caution on that, I do like him. I think he'd be good. But I know the number one thing Chargers fans hated was running the football when you have Justin Herbert. So when you bring in a run game coordinator as your OC, you're flirting with that. Okay, it's going to be a run first offense.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. And Alex and I kind of dealt with that a little bit because we were kind of, talking about Arthur Smith and what he would do in Los Angeles. And I think that Arthur Smith would have been a really good hire too, just like Brandon Staley is. But
yeah,
I think Kevin O'Connell would be a fantastic choice. I would be interested to see if Sean McVay would kind of, prefer to keep him around and maybe give him a little bit of a raise because, you're losing probably a good portion of your defensive staff.
Yeah.
So I think that would be interesting. Maybe Shane Waldron, the passing game coordinator, would be a little more realistic from poaching the Rams one. Mm-hmm. As much as I think Shane Steichen and Pep Hamilton and the continuity would be good for Justin Herbert, I just don't trust their system and the lack of creativity that those two would bring. And so for me, I think the best move forward is to get Justin Herbert into the Kyle Shanahan system. And that's something that Kevin O'Connell and Mike McDaniel will both bring to the table. Again, because Kyle Shanahan lost, the LaFleur brother already. I could see him making a push to keep Mike McDaniel as well. So we'll see, man. I would love Kevin O'Connell because, he's been in a bunch of different schemes. He's been offensive coordinator for Jake Gruden. He's been with Sean McVay. So I think there's a lot of good experience there.
Played quarterback.
Yeah. And so I think Kevin O'Connell would be a fantastic hire at offensive coordinator.
Yeah. One other name, guys, I would throw out there. If Eric Bieniemy does not get hired, which is sounding more and more like he won't be. So obviously he's going to stay as the OC. The quarterback coach in Kansas City is a guy named Mike Kafka, who actually I think got an interview by Philly for a head coaching position. But I don't think he'll get that because he's lower down the list. So he's another guy that would be a promotion for him from QB coach to OC, and he's heavily involved in that offense as well. So that's just another guy to put on your list as a guy that's involved in a Andy Reid tree that isn't a bad as far as offenses go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good call. So, you and I talked a little bit about Brandon Staley a while ago, and how his experience as a college quarterback at the University of Dayton really affects his play calling and strategy as a defensive coach. So, if you could tell our listeners that same kind of, conversation, why is Brandon Staley unique to someone like a Robert Saleh or, Leslie Frazier that is like uniquely, strictly a defensive candidate? What makes Brandon Staley different?
Well, it seems like we're starting to see a little bit more of a trend of these, players that played a certain position and end up coaching the other side of the ball. And it's almost that reactive mindset that they know they can think almost 2 steps ahead, because they can say, well, this is what I would do if I was playing quarterback. And so I'm going to coach my defense to, hey, if you see these looks, this is exactly what he's looking for. He's looking for you to do this. So he's going to throw to that. Well, we can disguise that. So he's really, really good at disguising looks because of his experience as a quarterback. So he can, throw out a certain front at a quarterback and then, switch it up last minute once they snap the ball, because he knows exactly what the quarterback is going to read and what he's going to try to do. And then his defense 2 steps ahead. We saw that in the Seattle game, the first playoff game, when Darius Williams jumped that screen route for the pick 6. He knew exactly that ball was going to that spot, the way they had this formation Seattle did. And so, I'm not saying Brandon Staley necessarily made the play. Obviously, Darius Williams did, but he's coached these guys to look for those things, look for these things. So his film study is unreal, impeccable, and just the teaching side. I've talked about him too. His wife is a teacher. And so he approaches, when he's in his interview, he always talks about teaching, not coaching. So he's teaching these players certain things and they're studying a different way. And so then when they see these looks, they're used to seeing it in film room, and then they were able to put it on the field. So I think his ability of doing that as a quarterback has now led him to be able to coach to what the quarterback sees. And that's why they've been so successful in such a short period. I mean, you get guys like Troy Hill was, really a no-name guy. I mentioned Darius Williams was a walk-on who was cut by the Baltimore Ravens. These are guys that, Darius Williams had like 6 interceptions, I think, this year. So he's trained these guys to do very well.
You mentioned Leonard Floyd potentially being a free agent candidate for the Chargers. Who are some other guys, maybe through free agency, through the draft, that you think could be targets because of the Brandon Staley hire?
Oh, that's a good question. And anyone that I'd have to look through the free agency pool really closely, to be honest with you. But anyone that's a stand-up pass rush guy could certainly fit. Any too high safety. I mean, John Johnson's going to be a free agent. I know Chargers have question marks too. Obviously, they're going to pick up Derwin James' 5th-year option, but they have other question marks at the back end. So who knows if they go after? I mean, that pairing of, I know Nasir Adderley is still young, still on a rookie deal, but if you have a John Johnson, Derwin James tandem in the backfield, I don't know if they can really afford that, but that's something to look for. So, I mean, there's a lot of guys specifically on the Rams, but just league wide, I think there's a lot of guys that fit in the system because he tailors it to whatever their skill set is. There's not a specific guy that they really need to go after. But I just think 2 off the top of my head off the Rams, I really like Leonard Floyd because he's on the 1-year deal, had a career year. And I think he would love to keep playing for Staley. And then John Johnson, who, I mean, let's be real. If we're talking Rams, they can't afford to keep anyone. They're like 21 million over the cap. So they're in a really tough spot. Unfortunately, any of their free agents, they're pretty much going to lose. So if you play defense for Staley, I don't see why you wouldn't come and play for him, and you wouldn't even have to move. If you just bought a house in LA, you're set. So I mean, I think those are the first guys you want to look at.
Do you think corner becomes a bigger priority in the draft in the first round?
I mean, well, they would love Patrick Surtain if he fell to them at 13. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I here's what I'll say, Tyler. I think Mike Davis, I think he can make a Pro Bowl style corner. I know Mike Davis is a guy that a lot of guys are kind of torn on, at least fans are. I like Mike Davis. I think he played well this year. I think he would do really, really well in this system. And so I don't know if it'll be a huge priority at 1. I think they'll go best player available personally. Just off top. I mean, this happened 45 minutes ago, so really not getting into tons of draft stuff. But I just think there are guys. But you have, I think Chris Harris Jr., obviously Brandon Staley coached with him a year ago when Chris Harris was in Denver. So obviously he'll have some recognition there. But yeah, they'll want to get a little younger at the position for sure, because the Rams were very young. That's why they were so successful. I know I mentioned Troy Hill and Darius Williams not being well known, but they are young guys, and the Chargers are a little older there. So whether it's through the draft or just young free agents, I think that's definitely a position they'll address. But yeah, I'm excited to see what Mike Davis can do potentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that impressed me sorry, Steven. One of the things that impressed me so much about this, I'm sorry, I don't watch a whole lot of Rams football. I barely made it through 16 games of Chargers football. One of the things that was so impressive though is, I watched it in reverse order, kind of. I watched the most recent Seahawks game recently, and it's just the smartest defense. It looks incredible what he does for that defense. Everyone's so smart. Everyone knows the roles, whatnot. But again, this guy came in very early in, not very early, excuse me, very early on the season. They were having struggles, playing guys like the Bills. And I was going to watch like Staley versus Dable. Like, how did Dable beat Staley? So what happened? Like, what did they do something different? Did Staley do something different? Particularly just because it was, a COVID offseason, his first year, did something change like in between those earlier games to later on? Because you look at the Bills game, the outcome of the score, at least, which I haven't watched the whole game, so I don't know. And now, at the end of the season, they're the number one defense in stopping Russell Wilson, who arguably is, the best quarterback playmaker other than like Patrick Mahomes. So did something happen? Like, what did they do differently?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I first just want to say, just to give Chargers fans relief, because I know a lot of people will immediately look at this Packers game where the defense did not look good, and they'll worry, like, really, that's the guy we're going to hire. It was a bad game, whether you want to call it preparation or not. The Rams, if I can just really briefly talk, the Rams just did a lot of uncharacteristic things. Missed tackles, missed gap assignments. Obviously, Aaron Donald was not healthy. He was not himself, which is a huge part of. He would be a huge part of any defense, but especially the way the Rams run. So I still want Chargers fans to look at that game as like, oh, okay, this is what we have to expect, because it was just an uncharacteristic, odd game. Aaron Rodgers is playing out of his mind. But to answer your question, a lot of what Staley has done. You mentioned it with, COVID offseason, doing everything through Zoom. When you're implementing a brand new scheme, especially a scheme like he runs and teaching like he does, a lot of that's just going to take some time to get. Like, you can't study for a test in, one day and expect to pass. It's going to take some time to really do the prep work, do the book work, get into it. I mean, you're a smart guy, so it's going to take some time to really get into that. So that's part of it. B, and one of the reasons why McVay brought Staley in was his frustration with Wade Phillips, who's one of the greatest of all time to call defenses. But Wade Phillips this is my defense. This is what we're running, and we're sticking to it. Whereas Staley will kind of let things happen. It's kind of that quarterback mentality against Steven that we were talking about. Let things happen. And then as as some drives progress, they make adjustments and then clamp down. So if you watch the Bills game, I love that you bring that Bills game up. First half, Brian Dable, Josh Allen, the Bills were moving the ball at will. They were leading at halftime, I think 21-3. And even the first drive in the second half, they scored. I think at one point it was like 27-3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
27-10 or something like that. And then after that, all of a sudden the defense just clamped down. They didn't let up anything until that very last touchdown at the end of the game. And so it's just those adjustments, in-game adjustments they're able to make, where it's I don't like calling it reactive, because that sounds like you're not the right term, but it's basically letting the offense show you what play their hand, and then doubling down and then fortifying what you're doing and then attacking on your defensive side. So it was just more of a letting kind of the defense take shape, letting the defense and the players learn, and then throughout the season, just adapting to what they were doing. And then in games, just letting the offense kind of do things, predicate things the first couple drives, and then adapting and really clamping down as the game went on. So that's why through this Packers game, I was like, oh, they're going to be fine. They're adapting. And then unfortunately just never were really able to officially move forward.
Well, and I think, we talked about the one game thing, and, losing Aaron Donald and having Aaron Donald at like 50% health, like, that's a big deal, especially against Aaron Rodgers. And, I think people should hold off on judging Brandon Staley just because of that game.
Yeah.
So Alex, Tyler, do you have any other questions for Ryan before we let him go?
That's it.
No, that's it for me.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, this has been so good, man. We've been able to talk some X's and O's stuff with you. Great insight on the Chargers' new head coach, and we look forward to talking to you later on. We've got a lot of good off-season content to cover now. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you later on.
Hey, fellas, thanks so much for having me. You guys do awesome work. Keep up the podcast and stuff. It's been fun following your journey. And yeah, man, I'm stoked for this hire. I think it's a good one for the Chargers and a good one for LA. And I think fans should be really excited about this one.
Absolutely.
I agree with that as well. Make sure you follow Ryan on Twitter as well as the LAFB Network, because we put out a lot of good content for you guys as well. All right, Ryan, thanks so much, man. And we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, fellas.